Hi, welcome to Love the Goal, the podcast where we explore what it means to live out the love of Jesus into our daily lives. Love that is beautiful, love that brings people together, but also can take us to uncomfortable and even messy spaces. My name is Chris Heckert, and I'm the host of this podcast. My guest today is Reverend Cristin Cooper. She founded Coop's Soups, which is both a company and a ministry that uses soup to create community and also to feed those who are in need of food. She goes into talking about how she founded Coop's Soups, which you can check out their website, coopssoups.com, COOPSSOUPS.com. And she talks about how it forms community and how she can bring people together to even share in the soup making to donate food. Just a word about our interview. We have a beautiful conversation. There were some issues with the wireless connectivity, I think, and so her connection gets a little choppy in the video only. If you're listening, you won't notice it at all. If you are watching, her screen might freeze a little bit, but the conversation is very much worth it. Just to hang on and listen and allow her storytelling and our dialogue to inspire you and even challenge you to make love the goal of your life. Well, let's dive into the conversation. Well, hi, Cristin. Great to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Chris. I'm so excited that we're doing this. Thanks for your email, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for joining me on Love the Goal. So what were you up to this weekend?
Yeah, so this weekend, we've had some really busy weekends as a family. So I saw that Saturday was a totally open day on the calendar. So I totally blocked it off and was like, this is when we're just hanging out as a family. And just a favorite family activity is hiking. So we just went on a hike on Saturday and then watched college football the rest of the day and just ate chili and cornbread. It's a little chilly here in Maryland. And so it was just really relaxing. And then Sunday, this is where my ministry shows up to our farmers market. And so we sell soup at the farmers market. It's just like 10 minutes down the street from me. And it's just a lot of fun this time of year, particularly fall, with all the new produce coming out. And we locally source our soups, vegetables. So it's always fun to kind of be like, hey, see that farmer over there? Like, we use their sweet potatoes. So that's what I did this weekend.
So your ministry is selling soup at a farmer's market. How is that church? How is that ministry? And how did it start?
Yeah, so it really started out of my own loneliness experience. About 5 years ago, I started to identify that a lot of my relationships felt shallow, performative, rushed. And I began to ask this question of how do I slow down and build relationships of depth and honesty? And I began to answer that question by inviting friends and some literal neighbors into our apartment for soup and bread and intentional conversation. And about 4 months into those weekly soup and bread nights, the folks that were coming said, the soup is really good and you should think about selling this. And I was just doing this because I felt called to this community. And so I wasn't making any money doing it. And I was like, you know what? I am going to look into this soup business. I was interested at the time in spiritual and social entrepreneurship. And I was on track to become a Methodist pastor. So I was like, I'm going to explore this way of doing ministry, this kind of social entrepreneurship avenue. And so I looked into what does it look like to start a soup business that reflects the ministry that's happening in my apartment, where we're slowing down and practicing becoming present to God's grace and the food and in those we share it with. And what started to get revealed was selling soup at our farmers market, where our literal neighbors are who we're encountering, and using those interactions as a way to practice loving God and loving our neighbors. Locally sourcing became important at the beginning because it felt really natural to connect our customers and our neighbors to their neighborhood farmer and their neighborhood growing season there's kind of some environmentalism there, some love of creation and God's creation. So that was the intention in that piece of locally sourcing. All of our soup jars, they have a label on them that reads soup to share as an awesome way to make friends and fight off loneliness. And then on the other side of that label, there's a conversation starter to encourage depth of conversation and meaningful connection. And then the soup profits support a once a month gathering where we make soup in community and eat the soup and then package it up and donate it to our local food bank. And in that space, it's really important to us that we sit down and eat the soup that we just made, because we really want to counter that charity mindset of like, oh, I couldn't possibly eat the soup for people that are more in need. We really wanted to embody that God's grace is equally spread among those in God's family. We're all members of God's family. And so we're all going to eat. If this soup is good enough for our neighbors experiencing food insecurity, it's good enough for us. And so I've been doing this for almost 5 years now. And that's over the course of those 5 years, that's a lot of what it looks like. These key activities of sharing soup with our neighbors, using the label and the conversation starter, the once a month gatherings where we donate to our food bank, and then the weekly farmers market.
I love that. And I assume I don't have to ask where the name Coop's Soups came
Right.
from. But you had shared with me on the phone that when you're at the farmer's market, if folks, part of the goal is not just to sell soup, but also to talk to your neighbors and those who are buying soup. And if people want to talk more than a couple minutes, you put them to work. Is that right?
I do. Yeah. I invite them behind the booth just so we can finish catching up. And then what happens naturally is the next person that shows up, we know usually around 75% of our customers on a given week. And so I'll greet them and say, hey, Barbara, this is Carl. This is how I know Carl. This is a connection with Barbara. And then what will then sometimes happen is Joe shows up behind Barbara. And so then Carl and Barbara start talking and I start serving Joe. And so yeah, I put them to work and they're so used to it and they just kind of know that's what's going to happen. So
I love that. Have you seen people feel ministered to through that? Like people who are hurting or lonely kind of experience that tangible love in that experience?
yeah, definitely. I think little things like they'll tell us to keep the change and they'll say, we really believe in what you're doing, or thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of the community building energy here at the market. What will often happen too is customers will meet one another and kind of develop a relationship and then maybe coordinate a visit to come to the market next time. And so there's that fighting off loneliness piece of like, you were coming by yourself, now you're coming in community. The farm where I live is like really family centered, and the market really works in accordance with that. There's a kids tent and lots of kids activities. So really common also for parents to meet at our booth or just behind our booth and swap phone numbers and coordinate play dates. And then just my own experience of what it looks like to coordinate a visit to the market with my neighbor or meet up for a play date. I just know that in those interactions, you're sharing your life and you're encouraging one another. And then who knows what else, kind of the mystery of the relationship and God. And I think, I think that's really cool. We have some customers that will like print off newspaper articles and bring them to me to give to the next, like to be like, oh, I remember meeting Barbara last week. Could you give her this newspaper article? It was based off a conversation we had. Or like, here are some tomatoes. I heard this thing from so-and-so. Could you give the tomatoes when you see them in an hour? Yeah, all those little pieces start to
That's
happen.
awesome. Sounds very small townish.
Yeah.
I grew up in all the good ways. I grew up in a small town, and I have a lot of questions about the soup. I want to talk about the soup, but let's jump into the theme of the podcast.
Yeah,
We'll come back to think about what your favorite soup is. But this podcast called Love the Goal, looking at really the intentional practice of putting Jesus' love into action, which is, not always reciprocal, which is not always rewarding immediately. And so I just wondered if you might share of an experience where you felt God's love in a transformational way that kind of was the seed for you putting love out into the world.
Yeah. You know, yeah, there's this really poignant moment when I was 17. So I'm a junior in high school, and went to a performing arts high school, and my performing arts class had just read the Laramie Project, which
Mm,
is about the murder and hate crime against Matthew Shepard, who
okay.
was murdered for being gay in Laramie, Wyoming.
Mhm.
And 2 weeks after reading this play, a high school boy in the town next to mine was murdered for being gay. And so I went to our principal and I said, we have to do the Laramie Project. It's so relevant in so many ways. And he said, no, it will not make our school money. And so that was its
Mm.
own learning. That's a different podcast for a different time of like my first moment of like doing the right thing is not going to make us money. So we're not going to do it. Okay. So
Motivations, right?
yeah. So anyway, so he said, no, we're not going to do it. It's not going to make our school any money. And I vividly remember hearing a voice in my head, which I can only say is the loving voice of God, say, you are not hearing, no, don't do this play. You are hearing, no, don't do it here.
Mm.
And so I went back to my class and said, we have to do the Laramie Project and we can't do it here. And I have language for this now, but like basically hospitality was not extended in
Mm.
this to us. And so, but hospitality can be extended somewhere else. And so let's go find out where that is. And we're like 12, 17-year-olds. So we're like justice oriented and ready to do this. So it didn't take a whole lot of convincing. And over the course of 7 to 8 months, we put into place being able to produce this play. And in the end, we produced it at our local theater company. They offered up the theater to us on Friday and Saturday night for free. And just several things had kind of happened in those 7 to 8 months where, again, we were just really experiencing God's love through extensions of hospitality, through extensions of generosity. We rented space around the town of Lakeland, Florida, for low
Mm.
cost or because of our parents or our friends' connections. We thrifted our costumes, or people's parents or grandparents showed up and kind of helped us sew costumes together or be stage managers. Um, I wrote a fundraising letter early on in the process with the help of my mom, and we took over the computer section at our local library and just sent them to LGBTQ plus organizations,
Mm.
affirming organizations, and we raised over $5,000. And we didn't use all that money in the end, so we were able to donate to the Matthew Shepard Fund.
Mm.
And not all of us in that group of 17-year-olds identified as Christian. Some of us did, some of us didn't. And so, I cannot say like we explicitly put on this play in the name of Jesus. We were praying at rehearsal or we prayed before opening night. We didn't explicitly do those things. But I can say that we put this play on in the spirit of Jesus, in the
Mm.
spirit of justice and compassion and love. And in that spirit, we were transformed in the process. And the movies that are made about performing arts high schools that show a really competitive environment are true. They're very
Mhm.
competitive. And so we're all now headed into our senior year. But because we had spent our summer in this way, and the play was produced in the month of August, and we're starting
Mhm.
school a week later, our senior year, the energy among us as a group was anything but competitive. There was a real sense of like, we had just done something that impacted our community and
Mm.
impacted us. There was just a sense of togetherness. And from that togetherness, we were wanting what's best for one another. We were genuinely joyful and excited and delighted for one another's accomplishments and one another's journey. And that that the whole thing, like start to finish, like the moment in my principal's office where God said, this is about hospitality. This is not about, you didn't just hear no, you just heard
Mhm.
not here.
Yeah.
And learning kind of this like innovate, like this, like my first experience of like innovation or being
Mhm.
like, oh, we're going to do something a little different, a little unexpected. Um, in the name of impacting our community, and then all the pieces of like, what does it look like to do something so scrappy but to have hospitality keep being extended to us because our intentions were pure and good.
Did
And
the
then
did the
yeah,
principal come? Did you hear
the
anything?
principal came. I was literally reflecting on this, like thinking like he did come, which I think was smart on a lot of levels. Yeah. It got written up in like our local newspaper. We were quoted as saying he told us no, not with any malice. Again, we're just
Yeah.
17. So it was smart of him for to come. Yeah.
That that's awesome. Do you know the Elton John song "Wyoming"?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you need to check that out. It's about Matthew
Okay.
Shepard. It's a
Oh my goodness. I will have to do that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful and haunting song that tells that
Mm,
story. Um, so do you have a favorite teaching on love? You know, a story or a parable of Jesus
yeah.
that inspires you?
Yeah, I would definitely say Matthew 25, verse 40, where
Mm,
Jesus says, you know, you do this to the least of my brothers and sisters, and you do this to me. This idea that anytime we extend love to the marginalized and seek Jesus in that process, we will encounter God's love and encounter Jesus and
mm,
grow in deeper intimacy with God's love.
uh,
That's, you know, my oldest sister has severe autism, so
mm,
it's kind of personal that like not only is that scripture verse personal, but more like I want your sermon to matter. I want your small group curriculum to matter. I want your Bible study to matter. It's good to do those things, but the fruit of them should be getting involved in the messy ways that that are connected to what it looks like to be in loving community. So yeah.
absolutely. I was hungry and you fed me soup. I,
Yeah, right.
I don't know if you know the Riverside Church in Manhattan, very
No.
historic church. I think it's the tallest church in North America. But I used to play at a midweek service as a musician there. And the service is called Space for Grace, and they serve soup and bread before the service. So anyone
Ooh,
who wanted
love
to,
it.
and it's in West Harlem. Now kind of Columbia University is creeping up in that area, but back in the early 2000s, it was really the border and the beginnings of Harlem, and so you had socioeconomically, you had kind of everything,
Mm,
everything from uh, professors and students to the unhoused, and
yeah.
really a sampling of the population, and I remember those tables were really sacred. I would
Mm,
travel with the drummer. I'm a guitar player, and we would go in with our gear before the service. We'd try to grab soup and then set up to rehearse for the service. And you never knew who we were going to sit with. It was whoever
yeah.
was there first, and very sacred because it
Mm,
opened us up to conversations that we wouldn't have otherwise. So you
that's
talked
right.
about the messiness of love, and in that experience sometimes people would just like yell at the air or rant or lovely conversations. So I've experienced love obviously being very beautiful and messy in community, and I know you have too. So what does that look like for you? Beautiful but messy.
Yeah. You know, I can't help but think of the farmers market. In the years I've been doing it, I really feel like God has revealed the farmers market as an expanded experience of church, or an expanded community, as definitely an expanded experience of community that provides this practical way to love God and love ourselves as our neighbor.
Mhm.
You know, there's this real sense of cohesion among vendors. When we show up, we help each other set up, or we help each other tear down. when vendors are going through something, the Only Farmers Market manager, with permission, will share in the newsletter what's going on. And very often a love offering gets started, or people literally show up. They'll like donate food to the vendor's family. If it's a funeral, there's actually a funeral this Wednesday of a vendor. So many of us yesterday were like, I'm going. Do you, like, literally asking questions like, do you want a carpool? Do you need a ride?
You've really formed relationships there.
Yeah. So, you know, I talked about the customers earlier, getting to know one another and connecting in ways beyond just the farmers market. And so those are definitely some ways that are really beautiful. Again, I've been doing this for a while, so the relationships that I've cultivated have been have happened over time, and so there's depth that's a fruit of the consistency and the time frame. But I've been asked to do a customer's funeral, to baptize a customer's baby, to marry two customers, and then getting to show up in those spaces and seeing some other vendors and customers in that space. I just think those are some of the ways that make it feel, again, that sense of cohesion and togetherness, and that we're a part of something bigger, and that bigger looks like we're committed to community. And so those are definitely some of the beautiful pieces. And then where it gets messy is when vendors and customers will wear political statements on their shirt that just, especially now, you just kind of are like, ooh, okay, like this person's for this person's against this. Sometimes customers will show up drunk from Saturday night. Sometimes customers don't behave in the best way, you know, aren't polite, or, you know, might harass a vendor. There's the, you know, all varying spectrums of like a community of disability, or just you know, two women walk up holding hands to a vendor, and you just kind of watch the vendor kind of make an adjustment in their body language or how they respond. And so that's definitely where it's messy. It's this like the diversity is synonymous with the complexity of community. That like it really is like what theologian Henry Nouwen says when he says, once you have community, you have a problem. Like it really is this, like, it's so beautiful and it's so complex and messy. And what does it look like to say there's a spirit of togetherness, so let's all treat one another with kindness and with dignity and love. And also, your shirt is making me so uncomfortable right now. I feel unsafe in my body, or, you know, things like that. So that's where it's messy.
Yeah. Online forms of community and expressions of community have gotten us accustomed to just blocking or unfriending or unfollowing, right? You know, I don't agree with that person. They make me uncomfortable. I'm just going to remove them from my feed. When you are in physical spaces with folks, it's not that easy. And you also, you also miss out. One of my guests prior to now, I think he's going to be just the episode prior to this one, Tim Merrill. He talks about, us discounting people's humanity, right? So, or we do things at the expense of people's humanity. And
that's right.
He's working in the city of Camden, which has some real serious social problems, economic problems here across the river from Philadelphia. And Tim is, working with and sometimes against people in political power, but he really works hard to get people to work collaboratively and not, because he says we can't lose our humanity. And I remember 2 election cycles ago, I think 2016, there was just this really strong sense of people distancing themselves from family members. I saw it in my own family and folks in my congregation. It's like, it's the only family you'll ever have. And those politicians that you're distancing, they'll never know you. They'll never care about you. They'll never sit at a meal with you. But it is hard and it is messy. So has love taken you to uncomfortable spaces? And what does that look like? And how has it maybe shaped you a little bit?
Yeah. I would absolutely say it has taken me to uncomfortable spaces. There's a woman that we've met at the farmer's market. This was back in 2020, winter of just before the pandemic hit. And um, she wasn't able to make it to the market that week. So we coordinated getting soup to her. Her and I coordinated getting soup to her at a grocery store. And so I showed up to this grocery store, and when we got out of our car, it had been clear that she was crying. And so I was feeling really emboldened. And so I said, I'm a pastor, which means my job is to listen. We can walk into the cafe here and start, I could, hold space for you. And so she took me up on it. And so we walked in, and I learned in that conversation a lot of stuff that was going on in her life, and also that she was battling stage 4 cancer.
Hmm.
And she said, can we do this again? And I said, yes. And so we met the next week, same cafe, same grocery store. And then she wanted to get some more information. And at the time I was leaving this, what had become a dinner church, that initial gathering in my apartment. We were kind of starting to identify as a dinner church. So she joined that. And like a week later, we're on Zoom. And she came faithfully, and she never identified as Christian. She just passed away this winter. And she never identified as Christian. And I just kind of knew that was between her and God, and that what God cared about was that I and the community were faithful to loving her and being very involved in her cancer journey. Feeding her and walking with her. And there were a couple of times when I would pick her up from an appointment. That was my first experience of what chemo looked like, and could feel the energy in the car. And that was really uncomfortable at times, and really asked questions of like my finances and my time and my energy and what mattered, and just kind of asked those really important questions, I think, that are like, in terms of ministry, like, what am I doing? Why does it matter? And what impact is it making? And that the messiness of that relationship, and kind of journeying with her, and also the beauty in that. There were lots of beautiful, it was very meaningful for me. And I think really meaningful for my ministry, those that are connected in it. I just think, I think that was a 4-year journey of like asking those questions that keep you accountable, and ask questions of sustainability, of like, how do you keep doing this work when it's messy and it's complicated? And sometimes you experience the fruit, and she wants to pray with you. She wants you to pray for her. And then other times when she doesn't want to see you because it's really hard right now, or fill in the blank.
So. I love what you said about, between her and God called us to be faithful.
Absolutely.
There are 2 particular passages, one in Matthew where Jesus says, I don't command you or call you to love like the Gentiles love. And then in John, Jesus says, I do not give peace as the world gives you. And so I think about the peace and love that Jesus gives to us is not conditional. I don't know if you know Rudy Rasmus, pastor in Texas. He wrote a book called Love Period, and says that, the punctuation of the world is commas, colons, and parentheses, and the love of Jesus is love period. And
I love it.
I think that is one of the things that we struggle with. And I see it a lot in the church, is that we want to minister to people as long as we think it's going to get us.
That's right.
As long as that person is going to do what we want them to do, they're going to whatever, accept or believe. But you talked about
a tithing member.
Yeah. So you talked about, it's not about what they do. That's not in my control. It's about faithfulness. Can you just expand on that a little bit? I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It is not product oriented. I think that, it isn't, and it can't be, because everyone's lifelong journey in God is a unique mystery. And so to try to instead to get to do anything besides co-journey
Mm.
is to, I think, usurp the place of God, is to make ourselves more important than we are. And all I have seen with that, and even just experientially, like before, there was a season where, like, growing up and have an evangelical church background, like I felt like this was my job to like
Mm.
save them and bring them into full relationship with Jesus Christ and get them baptized. And that if I didn't, I was failing. And so I think anytime we usurp the position of God, or we start to feel like things start to take more control, I only see anxiety. I only see the person who maybe even feels like they have the best intentions just start to get really anxious because it was never your role. That was never the call. That was never your responsibility. And so it is a mystery. And so I think that the call is to co-journey, to walk with, to love alongside, to be in relationship with, and that being faithful to that, we will, basically like seeking Jesus in that process, we will encounter God's love, and it will kind of give us the capacity to keep co-journeying and finding the and encountering the accountability when we start to overstep. Yeah, absolutely. Those are my thoughts.
I love that. I appreciate that. And that goes along a lot with the 12-step journey as well. The first episode of this podcast, we talked to Michael Beck, who does a lot of work with folks in recovery. And so I think it's another common thread through this conversation. It's really about what's on our side. Loving is about what's on our side of the street, what's in our heart.
That's right.
And it's not about outcomes, right? It's
Not
about
about outcomes.
efforts, and we leave the outcomes up to God.
Yeah.
Well,
And I'll just add this really fast, Chris. Like, I think that is particularly hard here in America because we are a capitalist society that functions a different way, that invites us into the productivity that capitalism asks of us invites us to competition and invites us to having power and control over others. And so I think this other way that we're talking about is also resistance to that capitalism, and does provide this other way of relating to ourselves and relating to our neighbors that is so life-giving for our soul and our neighbor's soul when we kind of embody that truth. Yeah.
So I want to return to the question I put off at the beginning, which is I want to learn more about soup. So how did you get into soup making? And well, let's start there. And then I want to hear about some of the soups that you make in community. So how did you get into it?
Yeah. So I think just I grew up eating soup. My mom likes to make a lot of soup, which once I was in middle school, I thought that was uncool. I'm like, Mom, let's just order Papa John's. But I grew up with soup. This is just kind of a fun fact. Our wedding rehearsal dinner was soup. So we had 3 different soups. This just tells you, like, I had no vision for Coop soups, and just, it's kind of funny to think our wedding rehearsal was 3 different flavors of soup.
What were they?
That is a good question. I don't remember all of them, but I remember one of them being an orzo, like a lemon orzo soup. I really love like orzo pasta and lemon juice and chicken stock. And so I remember that. I think there was a carrot meatball, and then I forget the third one. I don't even know if I had it. My mom made them all. So that was cool. And so so back to that loneliness piece, the way that I was able to kind of say, like, we're going to do soup and bread, was I was in seminary, my last year of seminary, and I wanted to explore doing church differently. And I had just encountered Simple Church in Massachusetts. And they gathered around soup, and the rest was kind of a potluck meal. And so I just knew from my own personal experience with soup that soup can be pretty low cost, and it's easy to chop up another potato or add a little more stock to, depending on like the varying degrees of who shows up and how much time in advance you know. And then the bread obviously being communion. So that was really it. And then I just love to cook. I've always loved looking at cookbooks. And so I just started to get a little more, it was kind of a creative outlet. Again, I'm in seminary. I'm like slogging through like papers and books. And so I was like, I'm going to start to get really creative with these soup recipes and make them a little more complex. And so I was getting interested in locally sourcing in my personal life. And so I was playing around with that. And so 4 months into that, that's when people started to say, these soups are really good. You should think about selling them. And then the first conversation I had with our farmers market manager, these are things I didn't know until you don't know them until you try to start a soup business. But she just said, this is great because we don't have a soup vendor at the farmers market. So it'll be so great to have one. So that's just kind of a fun thing to think about of like, oh, there was also like a market for this. Like, I mean, that wasn't on purpose, but that was just kind of just another little learning along the way of like, oh, we are like going to be the soup vendor. And so there's a lack there in the market vendor. You know, you've got your bread, you've got your vegetable, you've got your olive oil, but now you can get some soup. So that's kind of where it all started.
I'm very hungry. I did have a little lunch, but this is great. You're in Maryland, right?
I am. Yeah. I'm in Brookville, Maryland, just kind of the suburbs of DC.
Yeah. So it's on my list now to come visit you, try some of your soups. As we close our conversation here, this podcast is started for the purpose of a pilot group that's doing faith formation of what I'm calling youngish adults in their 20s and early 30s. And, digital media and content is kind of a modern field preaching and getting outside of church buildings and getting in interesting conversations into people's spaces where they are that might not happen in churches. So, as I work with this group of folks seeking to make love the goal of their life, what closing words or benediction might you offer in a minute or two about making love the goal of our lives?
Yeah, I would say, going back to kind of what we said, it is about loving Jesus is about experiencing the love of Jesus ourselves and seeking that. And so this like seeking Jesus by loving God and loving our neighbor, and that in that process, seeking Jesus by loving God and loving our neighbor, we will encounter God's love and be transformed by it. And so my advice or my counsel would be to ask questions about sustainability, because this work is tough. And again, going back to what Henry Nouwen says, once you have community, you have a problem. So how do you sustain this in the moments of resentment and exhaustion and betrayal and feelings of hurt and or stuff going on in your personal life, but your neighbors need you? And so I would just counsel. I would just say, like, if you haven't already, begin to kind of ask questions of like, what does this look like in terms of sustainability? Because this is a lifelong journey of growing in deeper intimacy with God's love by loving others. And so, yeah, what role does Sabbath have? What role does reflection have? What role does retreat have? Maybe there's some other things that can provide some sustainability. But I would just kind of say that questions around sustainability and discernment around sustainability will never not be important in this lifelong journey of loving God and loving our neighbor and growing in deeper intimacy with God's love.
And sustainability in terms of what you're talking about, of sustaining this path of love that can get
Yes, of
interrupted.
you. Yep, of you being able to sustain this lifelong journey of this. Yep, that's what I mean. That I don't mean. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I don't mean sustainability like you start a ministry project and now it needs to be eternal. I mean your sustainability. Your like, yeah. How do you sustain your energy and your yeah
And
embodiment, your commitment?
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I found being someone in ministry now for 20 some years, 24 years, I've found two things to be true. One, other people will almost never, and I would say for me, really never prioritize my needs for me.
Yeah, right.
Um, and there's always a level of guilt or shame that comes with that. Like if we're exhausted or we need rest or we need play or space for creativity when we're loving people and
Because
we
of
get worn
capitalism.
down. Yeah, there's guilt. And so I'm really glad that you
Yeah.
said that.
No, it's so true. It's so true. It is guilt, and we could analyze that, but yeah, exactly. Like, where does that come from? And it's not from God. So, yeah.
Well, Kristen, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I want folks who were listening or listening to this or watching this to go to coopssoups.org, COOPSSOUPS.org, and check you out. I know you also are on Facebook. And I really have enjoyed getting to talk to you and meet with you, and hope we meet in person someday soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I, I value reflection. So this was also just a nice time of reflection and, just kind of a reminder and little boost of energy. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen.
Love the Goal is a production of Pews Media, with executive producer and host Chris Heckert, and editing and production help from Fizur and Megan Martin. For more information, visit us online at twopews.org. We hope you'll join us again soon.